Thank you very much. It's wonderful to have your introduction, Bill, and thank you also, Dean Groves, and everyone here at Harvey Mudd who's been great working with you, and I'm really honored to be with you this evening. Let me just get my notes in order here. Good. Greetings. I wanted to start off talking a little bit about my personal history and my personal roots as a composer. I'll play an example of my early work a little later on that sets some precedents for my musical approach as it exists today. And then after that, I'd like to muse together with you a little bit about the issues of time in music, musical time, and the role of the computer, and then finally give you some thoughts as I see about the future for music and music in the future. I, as Bill mentioned, am originally from Los Angeles, and I studied at the California Institute of the Arts with Morton Subotnick and James Tenney. And at Cal Arts, I had exposure to a lot of not only contemporary classical music, but also electronic music, choral music, and a very strong world music department that included masters from Africa, from India, and from Indonesia. And although I participated in things like the gamelan and so on, I spent most of my creative time in the electronic music studios there. And this is a photo from the B303 studio at Cal Arts, and it's a little bit dark. I wonder if I can raise the luminosity a little bit here. Let's see if this will have any effect. No. No, but you can see a large synthesizer, a lot of knobs. This is an analog synthesizer made by Donald Buchla and Associates. And even though I found this photo on the web, I know it was taken at Cal Arts because I recognize the little Cupid doll that's over on the right-hand side. And this machine was where I and the composers who I was working alongside as students did our work. In the beginning, actually, this is sort of a little bit of a story I can tell, perhaps to my own detriment, because coming straight out of high school, I really, really wanted to go to Cal Arts. And Cal Arts was just beginning, it had not started yet during my last year in high school. It was kind of this visionary thing that was going to be starting up in Valencia, and it was going to have these powerful electronic music studios, and I was very, very interested in that. I had been working in kind of Western improvisational music in a garage band that did a lot of improvisation, playing keyboards, and I knew that sort of electronic music and synthesis was where I wanted to go. So I dutifully put together a demo tape and went down and played it for Morton Subotnick, who turned and told me to go home and read Doraya and study up on music and come back in a couple of years. But I didn't take no for an answer, and on the advice of a family friend, I showed up for the first day of classes, and I took every required course. I took solfeggio, I took collegium musicale, and I signed up for studio time. And Subotnick, who remembered at that point that I wasn't a student, decided that it would be too arbitrary to not let non-students use the studio. So he said, okay, go ahead and use it. And so I worked and I studied and I produced, and along with maybe 200 other students from all over the entire institute who were interested in working with the synthesizers. And when a studio like this is in constant use by 200 students or so, it's going to suffer a lot of damage and fairly quickly. And so by the end of 2 terms, they decided they really had to cut access down. And they were going to limit it to only, not 200, but only 12 people. And so I really knew that my goose was cooked, as a non-student, and the chances of, ever seeing this equipment again was small at best. Subotnick at this point had forgotten that I wasn't a student, and he knew that I had been working hard and produced some pieces, and I guess he thought they were of some value because somehow my name was on the list of the 12, and he took it down to the registrar's office, and they told him, hey, this guy's not even a student. So they made me a student, and they gave me a scholarship, and the rest is history. This is a photo of the studio in context. You can see on the upper left-hand side, those are multi-track tape recorders, a 4-channel tape recorder and an 8-channel tape recorder, various patching machines. On the lower left-hand side are stereo 2-track tape recorders. And that was actually a prototype, a digital machine that still wasn't working by the time I graduated. But this whole studio was really my work environment and where I really cut my teeth as a composer in the area of electronic, or I would say electroacoustic music. Because as time went on, I became less interested in electronic sounds and more interested in sounds which were microphone collected and then processed electronically, or just using tape recorders. And this is the CalArts Music Library, and the reason I'm showing this to you is because I think that my experiences working in this library were as important to my musical aesthetic and my compositional point of view as anything that I did in the studios themselves. What you see on the far wall there on the shelves are compact discs. But when I was a student there, those weren't compact discs, those were LP records. The library, the music library, had about 10,000 LP records that were, we're talking 1972, 1973. Compact discs had really, as a technology, existed but not really come into the fore. So maybe they didn't even exist then in 72, now that I think of it. It certainly, the library was made up of entirely of LP records, which were in general circulation. And these records, which were everything from, again, sort of reflecting the interests of the department at large, were not just classical music, but included electronic music and a lot of rare recordings that these ethnomusicologists had brought back from India or from Asia, and many, many fantastic things. But because they were in general circulation, they were also, like the studios, subject to not just abuse, but even just LP records. We romanticize about them now, but the fact of the matter is they wear out. They chip, they skip, they scratch, they warp, they break. So the LP records, as good as they are, were not going to last indefinitely for the purpose of the library. So someone had the idea, the music librarian had the idea that they should all be archived onto the medium of choice in those days, which was the cassette. And so my job, Subotnick put me up for this job because I think he knew that it would be a good way for me to hear a lot of different music. My job was to take every LP in the library and dub it onto cassette tape. I just realized that a lot of you might not even know what a cassette tape is, you younger ones out there, but it's a tape, and you can record onto it, and it lasts longer than a record. So they set me up in a windowless room. It was kind of like a dungeon. But for me, it was really kind of heaven. It was a room with, this is not a photo of it, but it sort of looks like that, with multiple turntables and multiple tape recorders. And I couldn't, it would have been very inefficient to do it serially, one at a time, so I would do 3 recordings at a time and just keep them going and going and going and going. So with these 3 recordings happening all the time, eventually I would work through. It was kind of a Sisyphean task because, of course, new stuff was coming in as well. But I kept plugging away, and it was really, you know, gosh, you know, what do I want to listen to today kind of experience. What I found, though, is actually because they set up a monitoring system that allowed me to listen to not just any one recording at a time, but I could listen to any mix of the recordings. I could listen to all three just to make sure they weren't skipping or hadn't come to the end of the side. But I found that all these interesting collisions, musical collisions, were happening when you had, some maybe 20th century classical music on turntable A, and you had some gamelan music on turntable B, and on turntable C you had maybe Milton Babbitt's Philomel, a piece for electronic music and soprano, and it was just interesting, and I began to sort of play with the balances between the two and discover how it worked. And it wasn't composing for me. I didn't think of it as something that was informing my own musical aesthetic, but it was. Absolutely it was. And as time went on, I went into a period where I eschewed electronic sound altogether and worked only with microphone collected sounds, and began to concentrate on music which I found, or some might say appropriated, or some might say stole, as a starting point for my own music. After I finished at CalArts, I took a job eventually as the music director at KPFK, which Professor Alvis had mentioned. And there, now I was kind of a studioless composer. I no longer had a big, massive synthesizer or studio to work in. But I did, being at a radio station, have turntables. Radio stations have a lot of turntables, and radio stations have tape recorders and microphones too. So eventually I thought, well, how can I, under these circumstances, make my own piece? And so, and another thing that, of course, the station had was a big music library. So I resisted the urge to copy every LP in the library onto the tape. Instead, concentrated on making my own piece. And there I did it a completely different way. I did copy one recording onto tape. I started out with the ideas, what would happen if I selected something kind of arbitrarily from the library? It's semi-arbitrarily. I wanted something that was short, something that was sort of familiar, something that was sort of very musically inviting in listening to it. And then I would do something with it, turn it into something else. And how would I do that with just these tools? No processing tools per se. No filters, no modulators, no distortion devices, just a turntable and a tape recorder, or two tape recorders. So I came up with an idea which I call the Sukhothai process, which basically involves two tape recorders and a mixer. And what I did was I recorded this. I finally came upon the piece of music that I thought I would use, which was some harpsichord music, about 1.5 minutes long, a piece by Henry Purcell called The Rondo from Abdelazer, which is a pretty obscure title. And how many people have heard of The Rondo from Abdelazer by Henry Purcell? All right, a couple of music people in the audience. Now, how many people, do either of you, why don't you shout out what that music is known by the rest of the world as, that theme?
Romeo and Juliet?
No. Close. That theme was used by Benjamin Britten in his Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, which a lot of people know because they went to maybe young person's concerts. Dum, 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 da, 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 dum, dum. Anyway, you'll hear it in a second. I took that 1.5 minute piece and I dubbed it onto my tape recorder. And then I mixed it down to mono and I dubbed it on my second tape recorder on the left channel only. Then I rewound everything and I dubbed it in mono onto the right channel of the second tape recorder, displaced slightly in time. So a little bit of a delay between the two. Then I thought, okay, I'm going to try this again. So I mixed my two harpsichords down to mono, a single signal, and dubbed them on the left channel of my first tape recorder, and rewound again and dubbed onto the second channel. And so my 2 layers of harpsichord had become 4, right? You're following me so far, eh? What? And at this point, what happened was that the small delay that I had before, which would have been just a kind of echo effect, became a more complicated rhythmic effect. Not a regular effect, not a regular rhythm, but something a little more complicated than that. Definitely you could hear the theme, you could hear the notes, and so on. All right, I'm hip to this, and I thought, let's keep going. I dubbed my 4 harpsichords down to a single mono channel, recorded on the left channel of the second tape recorder, rewound again, recorded on the right channel. My 4 harpsichords became 8. And I just kept this process going back and forth, again and again, into the night, until I finally ended up with 1,024 layers of harpsichord. And what, in doing this, of course, I was listening all the time, keeping an eye on the levels, and I listened to how things transformed. My original harpsichord, the echo, the more complicated delay. As time went on, things tended to merge and diffuse. Eventually, you lost the feeling of the individual notes, but you still had the sort of plinkly sound of the harpsichord, and feeling of sort of the sharp attack of the instrument, etc. But eventually, as we got into, 256 layers, even that started to fall away, and you were instead losing a sense of the micro details of the music, but still being left with the broadest shape of the original music, which was preserved. And by the end, it's just a wash of sound going over with the broadest contours of the original piece preserved. And what was interesting for me as the person who composed this, or did this process anyway, was that my experience of each iteration was conditioned by each previous experience that I had. In other words, I was comparing it to each time I heard it before, and that comparison was a point of interest itself. And so I concluded then that really the only logical way to present this as a piece of music would be to assemble it in serial order, starting at the beginning, moving through all the generations, and ending at the end, and that is how people would listen to this piece. And so that's what I did. I just assembled it in order, and people hear it at the beginning, and if they listen attentively, they can follow exactly what's going on. But hopefully they will have some sort of surprise or revelation as the piece evolves against what most people expect. So if it's okay, I'd like to play the piece for you now, because it's a sort of important part of my formative musical history. It's my first piece professionally. And it's called Sukhothai. It's a Thai restaurant that no longer exists here in Los Angeles. And let's give it a whirl. Thank you. Thank you. Now, about, what is it, 33 years in retrospect, if there's one thing in life I could do over, it would be to take out that cutesy ending and just have it end with the harpsichord layers. But it is what it is. So that's Sukhothai from 1979. And the piece really was my entree into the use of repetition as a kind of functioning aspect in my musical style. And I really began to think about the experience of repetition and the fact that experiencing each iteration in repetition is, of course, conditioned by each previous one. Every time we experience a unit in repetition, what we are hearing is unique because it's been conditioned by all the previous times we've heard it before. And this is another way of saying, really, that no true repetition exists. This is kind of my theory, and I gather it from, for example, the quote of René Char, that each act is virgin, even the repeated one. And also Marcel Duchamp had something to say about it. To reach the impossibility of transferring from one like object to another, the memory imprint. I'd like to talk a little bit now about musical time. Roger Johnson, the musicologist and the composer, has rightfully pointed out that computers and music are both about time, and they're both about memory. And in the past, the dominant musical metaphor was the clock, and music generally proceeded in a timeline as delineated by a musical score. Jeremy Rifkin has proposed that the computer is driving a fundamental revolution in our deepest understanding of time and our relationship to it. We've moved from a clock-based culture to a computer-based culture, and just as the mechanical clock transformed our way of thinking really fundamentally in the 14th century, so the computer is, through things like the notion of random access, restructuring our present sense of time. But in other ways too. I think in music, composers very often sought to determine tempo as part of a performance aspect, yeah? Allegro, maturato, and very often you would see instructions like as slow as possible or as fast as possible. And for the past several centuries, this kind of term derived its meaning from both the constraints of human ability and also just the limits of instrumental mechanics, yeah? In the digital world, though, these constraints don't really exist. And we have, in a sense, a kind of paradox, because any music that can be slowed down can be slowed down even more, as slow as possible. What does it mean? In the analog electronic world, issues of things like media and storage capability and also fundamental acoustics placed outer limits on time. For example, what do I mean? Well, in terms of storage, we have things like the LP record, which I mentioned, or the 45, the cassette. They all played a hand, but you also had this fundamental acoustic fact that sound being vibration in time, yeah? If it goes too fast, it becomes imperceptibly high, or if it goes too slow, the vibrations in air simply exceed our ability as humans to perceive it or as speakers to reproduce it. And we have this sort of relationship between pitch and time in the analog world that seemed unbreakable. If you take a recording and you play it at half speed, it is twice as long. It's slow, twice as long, but it's also shifted one octave down. If you do the reverse, if you play it at double speed, of course, it's twice as fast, and then the pitch rises into the territory of like Alvin and the Chipmunks, if you remember Alvin and the Chipmunks, or maybe more musically useful. I guess it's a judgmental term, but like the experiments that Frank Zappa did, shifting vocals up for his project like Uncle Meat or Reuben and the Jets. But when you slow things down beyond a certain point, you go beyond these limits of reproducibility. And composers in the beginning of the electronic music or the electroacoustic worlds played with this relationship of pitch and time. The composers like Pierre Schaeffer, and even John Cage used turntables as musical instruments, and they did exactly these things by speeding up and slowing down their turntables. They played both with time and with pitch as well. But and we have proto-turntablists today like Tom Rochon, who's here in the California area, Christian Markley, and Gabriel Prokofiev, who's a grandson of Sergei Prokofiev, has done a concerto for turntables and orchestra. But in any case, in the digital world, this stranglehold between pitch and time has been broken because using sampling techniques and resampling, we can separate pitch and time in such a way that we can, for example, extend time without changing pitch or raise or lower pitch without extending time. Once again, we don't have any practical barrier to slowness in time. We often encounter music that's played at a tempo that's faster and more precise than it could be played without computer intervention. We also have music that is been paced almost geologically. We can slow down music to the point where there's no practical limit. And that's why you have things like Pitziger's epic slowdown of Justin Bieber, where you can turn a 14-year-old adolescent into someone as monumental as a Mahler symphony, just by slowing it down. And there's really no limit in today's algorithms, and no limits in storage. I mean, we have cloud storage and terabytes and petabytes of storage, so we can make a recorded piece that lasts a year and store it and play it back. This is Leif Inge from Norway, and he's a composer who took Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the entire symphony. It's about 70 minutes long in the recording. And he applied an algorithm to the recording so that it took 24 hours to unfold. And he called his piece nine-beat stretch. 9-beat stretch. And if you want to listen to this, by the way, you can, there's maybe a little difficult for people in the back to see, but there's a Dutch website that has this streaming constantly. You can tune in any time and listen to the whole thing. It takes 24 hours, and it's really quite a revelation. But, you know, as I was saying, I think we're at a point, sort of a Zeno's paradox, where anything that can be slowed down can be slowed down more. So I had sort of the mischievous idea of what would happen if I took Leif Inge's 9-beat stretch and I slowed it down by the same ratio. And that ratio then would yield 494 hours for one composition. And so with your permission, I'd like to play it for you now. Now, I'm kidding, of course, but I would like to play you a short excerpt, if that's okay. What would be 1.5 seconds of the original Beethoven, stretched by Leif Inge and then further stretched by me. It's really a kind of microscopic look at just what is otherwise just a passing instant in musical time, stretched out. You won't hear anything dramatic or Beethoven-esque per se, but you will hear kind of the internal cosmology of a musical moment. So we'll just listen. Maybe. There we go. that wasn't the full second and a half, was sort of running short on time, I think, so we only listened to about 3/4 of a second expanded. Okay. Having talked a little bit about extension of time, I'd like to maybe do a short performance which is kind of about abstracting time, shattering time, and reassembling it almost in a mosaic fashion. What I'd like to do is play something for you in the manner of an improvisation, and if Mr. Cameraman can shift over, you can at least get a peek at my screen. I'm sort of policy-wise opposed to displaying my computer screen when I perform. Occasionally people say, well, why don't you project your screen or something like that, and I really don't do it in performance, but I think for the purpose of kind of demonstration, although you can't see so really clearly, you can get an idea of what I've got. This is a number of Max MSP patches. Max MSP is a programming language that I use. These are programs that I've written that communicate with each other. And basically what you have on the far upper part of the screen there are devices or media players that pull audio off of a hard drive. I fractured this audio by typing on my keyboard, and I load it into memory in a disjunct fashion. I then play it back in different ways, forwards, backwards, upwards, downwards, and mix all these things together and add other processing as well. So let's see what we can do. This is a total improvisation, and we'll give it a whale. And I'm not here. Oh, of course.
radio càng có hình thức đã do cá liệu càng đến tính cứ càng này đọc nói chuyện các quyền hoạt động với bản sao dài khoảng 3 phút đã do dài khoảng 3 phút cứ càng này đọc nói chuyện các quyền hoạt động với bản sao dài khoảng 3 phút áo đã do dài khoảng 3 phút dài khoảng 3 phút áo đã do dài khoảng 3 phút áo đã do dài 3 đã do
Thank you. Stuff. Thanks. Okay. Let me get back to the okay, perfect. So now just talk a little bit about what I see. I don't have a lot of time left, but a couple of thoughts about what might be happening in the next couple of years, 5 years, 10 years in music. Who knows? Back in 1984, on a panel discussion in Tokyo at a place called Studio 200, I proposed that in the future, people would be experience music interactively using interactive media like CD-ROM. I was influenced by CD-ROM and Laserdisc technology, which was just starting to arrive. And I suppose that in the future, people might write compositions where they would maybe record in movements or sections or even phrases, and people could, using random access, reprogram or shuffle to listen in new ways, in an interactive way. It's sort of breaking down the relationship between the consumer and the composer. And this certainly intrigued the audience members there in Tokyo just as much as it disturbed my fellow composers on the panel, who felt sort of threatened and challenged that the notion of their authority as composers was somehow under assault. But I think that my prediction has been borne out really 1,000-fold, beginning with the introduction of these interactive technologies like CD-ROMs and Laserdiscs that came from companies like Voyager USA, and of course in the present day we have all sorts of network collaborations. We have remix projects. We were talking at dinner today about a project where the composers for Tron are putting basic themes out there to be remixed by masses in a kind of competition. And we have online DJ culture and a lot of other things. So I did foresee that media would move away from the platform of the CD and become interactive, and I also knew that media itself would shrink, and what I imagined was that people would be trading IC chips with data. And it's sort of true today. People are using USB sticks as media for musical, not only for trading, but also people sell USB sticks in the way that they used to sell LP records or compact discs. What I didn't foresee in my abilities as a futurist and a prognosticator are mediocre at best, because what I didn't see was a global international network like the internet facilitating these kind of exchanges, and not only the exchanges, but the storage and the interaction and the collaboration and the composition itself. It was just the other day that I downloaded from the App Store a software emulator for a digital synthesizer that had come into the market in 2008. This app had just become available. I bought it for 1,200 yen, that's about $15. And I realized that this app had roughly the same power in its synthesis ability and its ability to record and play back, about the same power as the $500,000 studio that I worked at CalArts back in 1973. It's really Moore's Law meeting Zeno's paradox. We've had such a revolution in alternative interfaces for music performance, and communication and consumption are merging also. This is a very interesting thing because now we have bands like for the iPhone. Here is an example, a kind of chamber group, a duo called Adam and Atao, Adam Parkinson and Atao Tanaka, who perform using an iPhone in each hand. And what they are, let's see, basically, iPhones have accelerometers, right? Which is what's used when you turn them one way or the other to switch the focus of the screen, flipping photos back and forth. They use those accelerometers and as also the tilt sensors to send data and musical information to each other. And they also use the high precision capture technology, the thing that allows you to pinch the screen and zoom in or spread photos using this technology as well to replace the graphical user interfaces of sliders and faders and things like that. And all this is focused on an open source application written in the language called Pure Data, PD. This is a patch that runs on it's a free iPhone app. So let's take a look at this clip. So just in the interest of time, I don't think we have time to go through this entire clip, but this is Adam and Tao performing. And again, this is done using iPhones, standard issue iPhones with a free application written in the program of Pure Data. Okay. Let's see, to get out of here, I quit this browser, I think. Escape. Right you are. And quit, and then get rid of this, and go over here. There. All right. Next 5 or 10 years, I think I'm sort of expected to do some more prognostication, and my record is mixed, but what I think is actually, if I had to lay money on anything, it would be that the body and the instrument, or the body and the musical conveyor will converge. Bone conduction, for example, being a medium of sonic delivery, seems very interesting. Already we've seen some experiments, people developing orthodontic pieces that fit into the mouth that are used to transmit sounds through the jaw and into the body. You know, it's obvious that Moore's law being in effect in the next few years, computers are going to become practically invisible. They will certainly be very, very small. Ray Kurzweil, the futurist, remember, he also used to work as a digital instrument designer with his Kurzweil synthesizer, and he's predicted about cochlear implants into the middle ear, becoming ubiquitous. for artists. And so artists can compose music to be sent directly to the auditory portion of the inner ear and its core component, which, by the way, has a wonderful name, the organ of Corti. Nanotechnology and the like, how will it influence musical expression and delivery? John Cage was actually very interested in nanotechnology in the last years of his life. I'm not aware of any specific proposals that he made about how it might be applied to art and to music. But already we're starting to see flexible, stretchable, transparent materials that are thinner than paper, which can be used as loudspeakers, not just as for the cone of a driver, but actually as loudspeakers. This kind of material can be converted into clothing, of course, can be made into wallpaper, can be spread onto film like a window, can be made into a hat. This material comes from Chinese scientists and is made up of carbon nanotube films. So we could have, this carbon material is 1/1000th the width of a human hair. And we're talking about something that does not require any magnetic drivers or any parts at all. And when you think about the possibilities of that, I think we're going to reach a very interesting sort of collision and integration of acoustic media with the world around. And it's something that awaits us, and I can hardly await it. I hope I'm around. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.